What's up, everybody? Welcome to Send It, the official blockchain and cryptocurrency podcast by OKX Insights. I'm your host, Adam, and I'm joined, as always, by the lovely OKX Insights crew. And yeah, let's just jump right into our main topic today. So, to put it bluntly, the market's been feeling pretty bearish. Now, at the time we're recording this, there's been a nice little price increase in the price of Bitcoin and the sort of wider market. Which we'll get into. But overall, it's been a pretty negative sort of quote-unquote bear market sentiment going on because there's a lot going on in the world. And so the main topic of discussion I wanted to pose to my colleagues on this podcast is now the best time in its history to buy Bitcoin. Now, and I don't mean that from a price perspective, because obviously the best time to buy Bitcoin would have been a long time ago. So we're not talking about like return on investment. We're not talking about expected returns or even necessarily like the current price. So if we remove price completely from the discussion, we're not talking about the chart. We're not talking about technical levels or anything like that. Just its core value proposition, why Bitcoin exists, why Satoshi Nakamoto made it. With all that's going on in the world, in the geopolitical sense, with the past years of COVID and everything, and government printing and all sorts of things, is now the best time to buy Bitcoin. So I'll throw that to whoever would like to go first.
It's a tough question, Adam. I don't know. So today is March 9th, just for the record, Wednesday, March 9th. So this will go out a couple days later, but I guess I just want to set the stage and say we can see that we're in a serious crisis point and it's developing really fast. So that's like one observation. It's in terms of the kind of like phases of crises, this one feels especially like fast and impactful, I guess, because it's not just like a crash or something that like the COVID crash, for example, right? It's not a flash thing that happened where there's fear and uncertainty in the market and you can kind of understand what's going on. There's these more direct reordering of financial markets at play that are like consciously happening, and by that I'm referring to like massive financial sanctions against Russia, and basically cutting Russia out of the global financial system, which has just a huge impact on global markets. And I'd like us to dig into that because if other people want to answer Adam's question first, but we can dig into that. What's the stage later, like maybe later, because I don't really know. I don't personally know what to compare it to, right? It's not comparable to, like the crash of 2020 at all. So like reading some people who are more expert than I am, like Mr. what's his name? Zoltan Pozsar of Credit Suisse. Reading him, he's looking at he's observing this as like a huge global phase. That's the sort of third phase if we look at post-war being the first phase of the Bretton Woods Agreement, and then for like economic order, creating the IMF, and then the next phase would be when the gold standard was removed. And then we have a fiat system for the dollar. I mean, I'm not even summarizing what these are, but just like looking at these markers. So the 70s. And now like he's observing this is the start of a new financial monetary world order. That's like really, really big. that's kind of just what I want to say. In terms of, is it the best time to buy Bitcoin? I mean, like, it's obviously, uh, it because it's such an impactful moment and like crisis where we don't know the direction of the traditional financial system. We don't know like how Russia being cut out. Russia, that's a huge commodities market, being cut out of the financial system is going to affect markets. Like, Bitcoin as a hedge to the traditional financial system looks very logical, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like wasn't it Jay Powell last week said something about how there could be more than one global reserve currency, kind of saying that like, USD might not be the one and only forever, and we can accept and like maybe even start to like look at and hypothesize about what the world might look like when the US dollar isn't dominating, all of the financial system. And I think that like the fracturing that's happening right now with the, global economic financial system, I think that Bitcoin is you know, a great contender, I guess, for institutions and banks and governments that might want to have a to diversify their reserve currencies. But I think a lot of it also depends on what are people like actually expecting Bitcoin to do for them. On an
Mm-hmm.
individual level, is Bitcoin, if it is an investment, then you got to talk about price. You got to say, is now the best time for its price? Because like no, actually, it was better to buy it like 10 years ago when it first came.
Two
If
years ago.
in 2 years ago, right? But I think that like the what's stacking up now, maybe with the exception of China, is more and more governments are understanding that you know there's no real great way of like fighting it. Like Bitcoin is here to stay, and so like they're putting together strategies to, in a way, you know, maybe tamper down the all of the freedom and the crypto anarchism uh, mindset, or the kind of the philosophy behind it, and trying to integrate it more into a regulated system. So, so I think that in that case, it really depends on what you're trying to do.
Mm.
For some, it might be Bitcoin might not be the best, crypto to invest in. If you're, really just trying to put your I don't know, your savings,
Store value.
or yeah, your store of value. But maybe a store of value if you just want it to be pegged to the US dollar, USDT, even though it's not as secure, has a more centralized aspect to it. Uh, if you just wanted to move across borders and carry your value with you with 12 words memorized in your head, you can do that with USDT as well. So I think there is a little bit of like, is it the best time? Depends on what do you need it for, what do you want it for, also
Until
including
Tether
hyperinflation.
blacklists your address.
Yeah, so
Which is
Adam,
also
you're
possible, right?
yeah, the centralization aspect. I mean, Adam, you're asking in the context of um, the weakening dollar or potentially weakening dollar. Like it's just been a week and a half, right? So we'll see. But right,
I'm,
like that's
I mean, no, I'm asking in the context of everything.
yeah.
So what I mean is like, um, from my perspective, right? Looking back at the last proper bear market of 2018, there wasn't, to the if I'm remembering correctly, there wasn't really any like major like global like crisis going on because COVID hadn't happened yet. There wasn't. I mean, obviously there was war in the Middle East and stuff like that. I don't want to diminish that, but there wasn't like it was different, right? The war in the Middle East had been going on for a long time before Bitcoin was even created and all that stuff. Um, but since then, we've seen obviously COVID, and with that, we saw lockdowns. We saw people losing businesses. We saw massive government printing, which
Interest
is
rates go to zero.
yeah, and we've seen inflation already coming, and this is all before the military conflict going on in Ukraine now, which is also causing serious economic repercussions, as you mentioned, Olivia, and things that are being felt everywhere, whether it's in gas prices in Europe or the United States or anywhere. Things are getting hard. In the country I live in, the local currency is drastically losing value very quickly, and I expect it to continue to do so. So I guess my question was more like geared towards the individual. So the kind of idea that I do agree, like pegging to USDT is, I think, a viable sort of alternative to like Bitcoin if you just want stability to the US dollar. But
if you don't have USD, right? Like if you have yeah, that's the point.
But I think what I was trying to question or get at more is like the idea that of Bitcoin as a true alternative to USD or fiat currencies at all. So, if you work your whole life to save up a bunch of money, have your savings in the bank in a savings account, and then because the government, wherever you live, the government does something that you have no say and you don't care. The government does something, and then overnight or within a week or however long, your savings are now worth less. Maybe they're worth half of what they were in a very short period of time, let alone just standard inflation running its course. So I do think that in the world kind of as a whole, there is more of a doomer sort of mindset recently, especially over the past 2-3 years. And today, I think today people, or at least the sense I get, people are really feeling a heavy kind of weight of just everything going on in the world. Like, we just came out of, the second major year of COVID, and now we're looking at a war, a military conflict that's causing more economic problems to people who aren't even necessarily near where that's happening, let alone the people who are like impacted by it geographically. So yeah, I guess that was what I was trying to get at.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think there is something to be said for having like a Bitcoin go bag, essentially. I know even like some family members of mine, whenever there's kind of any threat, security, like any kind of impending possible situation, like a Y2K, let's say, you stock up on canned food and fill the bathtub full of water. And maybe it's in a way you want a wallet with some Bitcoin in it. It's like that doomsday scenario, bunker or something. So I think there is more. I think there's impetus for that to be included into the whatever could go wrong might go wrong, and therefore how to be prepared. I think that having a wallet with Bitcoin in it is probably what people are starting to understand more as like having a greater value than possibly just having cash and some fiat currency.
But to the initial question for me, not a lot. Well, nothing's changed about Bitcoin, and the risk of governments devaluing the national currencies has always been a risk, and the risk of them confiscating assets from citizens has always been a risk. So I personally feel that every day since finding out about Bitcoin has been the perfect time to buy Bitcoin.
Oh.
I mean, that is the best answer, isn't it?
Yeah, A+ for Rick.
Okay, let's end the podcast. We got it.
But honestly, best answer.
To push back on that a little bit, though, I mean, I think I speak for all of us here, right? We all are Bitcoiners, right? We all work here. We're all obviously, believers and have been for quite some time. But like, let's say you're not.
Well, you did ask me, like.
Yeah, I appreciate the answer, of course, and I
think it's
totally agreement.
Yeah.
But let's change the question a little bit and say hypothetically you're a no coiner or maybe a pre-coiner, right? You don't necessarily have to be a no coiner against crypto or something, but let's say you're just never really put too much thought into it, but it's kind of been in the back of your head, like, and you're going to buy Bitcoin for the first time, let's say. do you think now? Yeah, I mean, the question sounds a little bit silly because all of us are going to be like, yes, you should buy Bitcoin now, not financial advice. But in like again, divorcing it from price, just looking at the situation in the world, maybe do you think the situation in the world is heavier now and makes Bitcoin more warranted? Because obviously Bitcoin has already sort of stood the test of time to some degree, right? It's widely accepted now, I think, as not going to go to zero.
Yeah.
Like I can't even
Yeah.
imagine in my head. I can't imagine a situation in which Bitcoin goes to zero, right?
I just feel like the question like needs to be broken down a little bit and depends on where you are and who you are, right? So obviously. So like if you're a person with a fairly stable fiat currency like USD or Euro, and dominant, dominant global currency like USD, maybe if you have crypto, invested in crypto, or you are considering investing in crypto, like you're not a no coiner, then probably the way you're probably thinking about that is as like a small portion of, if you have, first of all, money to invest in anything, then you're probably thinking of crypto as like a small portion of your portfolio, right? Like balancing it out, and it's only X%, and it's um, not the majority. So like we're definitely not like normal people in that sense, I think, but that's that person, and I do think that like from the perspective of like the stable fiat currencies, now is definitely a shakeup for people with for people with that privilege, because as like we're seeing, we're we're potentially experiencing, we're in the beginning of a very large economic crisis on a global scale that will affect the whole world. So like I just said global, but you know what I mean. Like it won't just affect like Russia that's being sanctioned and Russians. Um, and again, like so that's for the sort of one side of like the more privileged, financially privileged people. Um, the use case of Bitcoin in that sense would be to like gold, to like hedge against having your currency be devalued from its or moved or reordered from its dominant status. Um, and people have been saying that forever, right? Not just now, but we're just saying again, like we're in a crisis moment right now, economically speaking, as well as like the actual crisis in Ukraine. We're in like an economic crisis, so, or the beginning of one potentially. And so that argument makes sense for those people. Whereas like if you look at it from the perspective of a person with a devalued fiat currency, like significantly devalued, like what your local currency, Adam, or the ruble, or the Belarusian ruble, or the lira. Yeah, so like not just related to this recent crisis, obviously. Then you're kind of like, you're just like, it's a way more urgent question, I feel like, and that's Maxwell, where your point comes in about like storing value versus just like hedging against devaluation. It's like you are kind of also historically, okay, so let me back up a little bit. If we're talking about a place like Russia, or the former Soviet Union, like that particular region, people who are fully alive now and not that old have already experienced such intense financial crises that like they've experienced the risks you're talking about. They've experienced like having money in a bank account that goes from amount to like basically zero, like fair amount, like life savings, to zero, because of hyperinflation. So that's not like a potential like could that happen like abstract thing. That's like happened for sure, to like the current adult population. So yeah, I just like feel like these questions matter for like what perspective you're looking from.
But to be fair too, I mean, when we talk about volatility, if you put your life savings into Bitcoin at 69,000, it could have also been halved at the current price. So I think there is, it again kind of depends on, like what you're going in for, and maybe we could break it down into a point where it's, is it a point where you need exposure to Bitcoin, or is it a point where you actually need custody of the Bitcoin? Because I think it might be a time for some people to sit down and think like, okay, if I buy Bitcoin through this app or through this app, like, are you able to withdraw it? Are you able to, put it into your own custody so that you can, take it wherever you go? Or are you still kind of in a gatekeep, like is there some gatekeeper that could theoretically stand in your way? And if it's about exposure to Bitcoin because of hyperinflation or because of just the devaluation of a currency, then yeah, maybe the custody isn't as big of a deal. But I think maybe to your point with the crises that are happening around the world, economic, military conflict, all of these things, I kind of think there's a three stages where if you had blocks of gold, cash USD, and some kind of hardware wallet, what's going to be the easiest to take with you and go? What's going to be most fungible? What can you trade for the things that you're going to need? So yeah, I think there's a different perspective when you're just talking about like exposure and like getting some kind of you're in the game, and you can do that just through like an ETF or through some kind of fund or something like that, versus having custody yourself. And I think it depends on where you're at and what's going on in your you know in your environment that would
And
determine
just, like
what you
more
need.
practical. Yeah. Like
Yeah.
being able to move money, just like some basic
Yeah.
thing, move, transfer, exchange. Yeah.
But it is still
think-
difficult. I mean, yeah. Go
I
ahead.
was going to say, I think anyone who's sort of been pushed towards crypto by geopolitics or the economic situation should certainly consider self-custody over all other options, because part of the fear would be like asset seizures, which it's not going to be difficult for the US government, various governments around the world to put pressure onto custody services and seize assets. It doesn't, that sort of neuters Bitcoin's value proposition.
Right. Then it's
Yeah,
just
this
about
also came up.
exposure. Yeah.
This came up also in the Canadian trucker protests. Trying to essentially block Bitcoin wallets, which is technically impossible, but you can cut off as many services and on ramps, off ramps, things like that for those wallets that make it incredibly difficult to access. And that's still a risk, I think, that people need to consider, is that yeah, you might have Bitcoin, but you still need to find a way to maybe P2P or maybe some other ways, but you still need a way to use that.
It's making me think of like I don't know. It's a half-baked thought, but it's like the tech savvy that's required to just like exist in places where, to exist and to be able to do things that we might consider normal, like access websites, in these like politically restricted jurisdictions, is just so intense. Like just thinking about how now like you need to understand like for your money, right? So self custody, and if we're just talking about cryptocurrency as the alternative, so that you don't lose access to your own funds and also lose value. There's the two things there, access and value. And then VPNs, accessing the internet. I mean, just like, not that VPNs are hard, VPNs are way easier than crypto, arguably, but it's just like another thing, right? And it creates these segments within society of like age and just like it's a huge problem. I don't know.
And even going further from VPNs, I mean, there might be access restricted to specific websites, but I mean, there's a lot of places in the world where there's, one line, kind of a lever that can be shut off, to shut off the internet. And there's still ways. I remember back in the Arab Spring, mesh networks being set up. And I mean, that takes a lot of technical know-how. I don't think that it's very easy to just, pop up a new internet, if you don't have any kind of understanding of it and how the networks are working. But yeah, there's still, like, where there's a will, there's a way. So I think that the same goes with Bitcoin. In any kind of post-apocalyptic era, I joke about this with my brother. People might either choose ammunition or choose Bitcoin, and I think I would choose Bitcoin. So
I would choose ammunition and cigarettes.
I also
For
heard of
sure.
somebody here like
cigarettes, yeah.
who's lived through and they're like my friend's parents, so they're not that old, but they were like adults in the 90s, and they are some of those few adults who did really well in the 90s in Russia. They're not like oligarchs, but they did well for themselves. And they were talking about how like alcohol is going to become a currency potentially in a financial crisis in Russia, which is interesting. Cigarettes you mentioned as well. Yeah.
Especially the imported high-end stuff. I think that's there's it's like a Rolex watch is having a nice bottle of whiskey.
Yeah, as an aside to that, I saw I believe in Pennsylvania, where I'm from originally. So Pennsylvania, all the liquor stores are state run, and so they're not selling Russian alcohol, it's like vodka essentially, but it's like the thing is, it's like they already bought it, so that means that they're just storing it in the back room. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like it's just gonna sit there until the time comes where it's like, is it cool if we start selling this again? You know what I mean?
That's
But anyways,
funny.
yeah, I'm glad that the discussion came in this direction, anyways, because like Max, you mentioned the trucker protests and stuff in Canada and everything, and like I guess what I was trying to get at is that now, just like globally, everything is so intense, like politically intense, geopolitically intense, like economically intense. Things are really ratcheting up dramatically. Whereas since 2008, of which Bitcoin was born out of that financial crisis, I mean, I never got the sense that things were really that intense. I mean, obviously bad things happened and there was conflicts and stuff like that, but never like to this degree. I think in my life, I think the last time I felt maybe like this level of unease maybe was like after 9/11, but I was a kid then. I was in like 7th grade. So I wasn't
Yeah.
an adult with like a fully formulated like adult mind that was capable of like processing the weight and gravity of like things. So that's, I guess maybe the point I was trying to get at was in throughout Bitcoin's relatively short life, and again looking at the bear market of 2018, I mean, I was always a believer in Bitcoin. I think we all were. So I wasn't like, it's going to zero, sell everything now. But there were certainly times in the bear market where I was legitimately questioning, like, am I going to just like lose everything because of like my exposure to Bitcoin? Like, am I too exposed to Bitcoin? Like legitimate fear. And I'm not saying that fear is not warranted now, but there were sometimes I thought, for lack of a better phrase, that Bitcoin could go to zero. And now I don't feel that anymore because it's so sort of like universally accepted. Obviously, it's not accepted in every jurisdiction in the world. But generally speaking, there's more institutional involvement. There's more on ramps. The industry has grown so large. There's lobbyists now in Washington. It feels like it's gotten to the point it's too big to fail. Which maybe perhaps even leads us into our next segment here, which a topic we want to talk about, which is the executive order that just was published, I believe, today at the time we're filming this. So to intro this topic, for the weeks leading up to today, we knew that the Biden administration, the United States, was planning a crypto-related executive order. I think this put some fear into the market. because people assumed it was going to be kind of like a, for lack, like a crackdown, quote unquote, on crypto, whether that be sort of like environmentally related or in some way that they were going to really hamstring the industry. And now it turns out that that's not really the case, from the sort of fact sheet that's been circulated around today of the executive order. Now, to summarize briefly, and we can get into each point in more detail, but to summarize briefly, the executive order just says a lot of things we already kind of know, which is that the U.S. wants the whole government to do their job with a specific thing in crypto. So they want to, of course, rein in the Wild West aspects of it, the decentralized finance aspects, under the guise of consumer protection and these sort of things. But they also had some favorable language in there about they want to encourage innovation and they want the U.S. to remain, a leader in the financial world, right? And help also maintain, I think, the dollar rate as the global reserve currency. So looking at that too, that's even more of a reason why to me it feels like, well, Bitcoin's not going to go to zero now. It's not going to fail. Certainly the price could go lower, but that risk seems non-existent now, that Bitcoin is just could fail and the experiment is over and we lost. So how do you guys feel about that? Again, looking at, let's say, the most recent bear market, 2018, a lot of fear about if Bitcoin is just not going to make it anymore or anything to where we are today, and looking at this really intense world we live in, and how Bitcoin's still sitting there just chugging along because Bitcoin doesn't care. It just produces blocks. What's your
Just
take?
want to point out too, the 2018 bear market, I mean, that was 2 years long. So even though when we talk about, what's happening in the past 3-4 months, I guess even just since November, I guess it's been a bear market trend, but it's really too soon to I think it's a different comparison than to what 2018 to early 2020 was. And part of that too, there's from correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think in any of the quote unquote bear markets, Bitcoin has never gone back to touch its previous all-time high. So when people are talking about Bitcoin going back to 20,000, I mean, it just hasn't happened. When it went in 2017 from 1,700 something like that to 20,000, it came back to 3,000. Then it went to 69 and it came back to 30. So I think there is this go to zero is probably impossible at this point, just because if it goes any lower, people are going to buy it. I mean, I would love for it to go to zero so I could just take all of the Bitcoin.
That's good. Who in the world is going to take all the Bitcoins? Can be Maxwell.
It'll be me.
It did, by the way, it did revisit
fact-checking.
previous. Yeah, it did revisit previous all-time highs. If you look at essentially the first major bear market of 2014.
Okay.
But that was a lifetime ago.
History.
Yeah.
So with the notes, right, the fact sheet on the executive order, I mean, my reaction is I've tried to read it 10 times. It's it's abstract. I can't read it. The words go in my brain and out, because the point is it's not really telling us much except for what you said, Adam, what we kind of already know, and then some specific initiatives. It mentions the initiative to create a central bank digital currency, and that's definitely a priority for the U.S. government. It mentions, like you said, being a financial and tech leader, or staying a financial and tech leader, but the thing is abstract completely, and how this is actually going to affect the industry is unclear, because it's not there's no specific laws or anything yet. But I guess the big thing, right, is that this is coming from what do they call it? A whole government approach, which you also mentioned. Whole of government approach, which you also mentioned, Adam. And that's new in the sense that previously crypto has been regulated in the US by all these different agencies, like the SEC or the CFTC as a commodity, or when it's tax, it's the IRS looking at it as property, or when it's FinCEN talking about licenses you need to operate as like an exchange or something. I could have got that wrong, but all these different bodies. And that was obviously a huge problem that we've been talking about in the industry for years, just like fragmented regulation. We focus on the US as an industry a lot because it's the US. Like, do we need to explain? And they have some of the harshest sort of like approaches to crypto previously. So hence why like whole entire companies just don't serve US citizens in the industry. So with that, like, I'm like, yeah, this, I'm not getting a lot of specifics from this, but I'm getting that this is a very new approach, whole of government. Do we have any sense of like, is this is, like you said, it's not negative for Bitcoin. Maybe there's something about, I don't know, Rick, like your thoughts that you shared before about how this could affect crypto more broadly. I'm not sure. Like, it seems like that's another question we haven't really gotten into.
Well, crypto more broadly, like, first, the executive order notes that I've read don't really do very much. They seem to just want to establish working groups, research groups to look into issues that have been mentioned by world governments for forever in Bitcoin. Terrorist financing, money laundering, taxation concerns. It mentions the environmental impact, but no solid actionable things, which I believe that the industry was afraid of, and that's led to the price pump today. In terms of how it will impact the industry, there's sort of a clean side to crypto that has been crying out for regulatory clarity for, again, forever. And I think they're going to have a clearer awareness of how they can move forward and continue what they're doing. And then there's the sort of other side of the industry that's a bit more pro freedom, anti KYC, and I think you'll see a division between a greater division between the two, because obviously there's already these two sides to the industry. I think you'll see more anonymous devs, and with that will come greater cover for scams. And then your likes of Fidelity Digital Assets and companies like that, obviously it's a great big green light to them because the government hasn't come out and said we're banning Bitcoin. Realistically, I don't really think anyone actually thought that, or no one close to the industry certainly. So in terms of immediate impact, probably quite bullish for the price because institutions like regulatory clarity, and institutions have a lot of money. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really helpful breakdown.
I also think if this news had come out in say 2018, it would have been seen as really bullish. Like, I think it would have been when there was all of that I think there was more concern about the regulatory clarity when there weren't institutions kind of on the side of Bitcoin, or a lot of like the Forbes billionaire list didn't necessarily come from crypto, or the lobbying like Adam had mentioned. So I think that now it kind of maybe is less exciting than maybe what it could have been if it had more, I don't know, even like a timeline or specifics. Because it kind of feels now it's just like everything's good, but we're gonna slowly get there as we go. So
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't feel like radical or anything.
No,
I mean,
exactly. But it
definitely
would
not.
have. But I think it would have in 2018. I think it would have seemed really radical, especially to the financial institutions that back then were more anti crypto in general.
Yeah, and back then too, there just weren't any institutional on ramps either. So
Yeah.
they would have like, if somebody, if this did come out back then, it could have been, who knows, really, it could have been really wild because if an institution wanted to get it, they would have had to get it through other means that they're not very keen on doing. Like they just wouldn't do it because it doesn't fit their like regulatory and risk profile. But yeah, I think maybe from a slightly more kind of cynical perspective or conspiratorial, though I'm not saying that this is true. The timing of the whole thing seems a bit interesting because it was certainly framed, and I mean it's no secret that the mainstream media frames things in certain ways sometimes. I mean everyone knows that, but like the way this executive order was framed for weeks leading up to it was framed as a negative, without a doubt. I think that this looks
For crypto?
bad, right? For crypto, that this is going to be more of a, not like a full-on like blanket ban or something, but that this is going to be a net negative for crypto. Like it's going to be like they're going to get hit hard with like regulations because it's an executive order. And I don't know, so I think that put downward pressure on the price of Bitcoin. And then, as is often the case, it turns out to be kind of what we might say is a nothing burger, in the sense that, I mean, it is something.
What one might call.
It's like doesn't have, like you both have said, like it doesn't have any actionable sort of directions in it other than like the whole government needs to like work on it. Like there isn't any immediate impact of like, starting at this date, like Bitcoin mining is going to be illegal or heavily taxed or whatever.
Right.
And I think, myself included, when I think of an executive order, I do tend to think of more of like an immediately impactful thing, like especially when a president first comes in, and they tend to sign a load of executive orders that undo what the previous president did, assuming the previous president was on the other side of the aisle.
Effect, starting today.
Yeah, and those executive orders tend to be a lot of like, like now this thing that was legal is now illegal, or this price decrease on this prescription drug is now no longer, and they can charge this price again, or whatever. Just immediate sort of actions. Yeah. Whereas this executive order doesn't really, to me, it doesn't feel like an executive order.
Yeah, you're right. This is very weird. Now that I think about it, It's really weird. Like, why is it an executive order?
Exactly. It's the same things we've heard. We've heard everything in this executive order that I saw, at least. We've heard all of it before. We need to examine the risk of it destabilizing the global financial system. Like, we've been hearing that forever, and we need to examine the environmental impact and all this stuff. So it's a lot of just saying we need to look at these things. But they've said that in Congress. They've said that to each other. They've said that to the media. They've said that it's like a million times.
Yeah.
So it seems a bit kind of manipulative, for lack of a better term, in case, the invisible man or the composite human, not to be sexist.
Thank you.
The composite human wants to get their bags filled or something like that.
Yeah.
Wait, so what would be like the bigger picture here? Like, do you have any, if we're just
Janet Yellen's buying Bitcoin.
Yeah. I mean, someone close. I'm sure that
Nancy.
Someone needed to keep some pressure on the price, like.
Well, that was in the know, that knew that the executive order was going to come out to be like fine, no worries. Like, who were taking the opportunity to, maybe they were surprised a bit by the the jump after the sanctions were announced, and maybe didn't have their bags full as much as they wanted. So like. Especially as the price was coming down to that kind of critical support level, because if the executive order came out the other way and it was strict, I think it could have had a really devastating effect as that support was lost. So yeah, I don't know. I think there is on the side of the conspiratorial, fringe, but I think that probably there were, players in the know that were taking advantage of the taking advantage of the time to fill their bags under 40.
Yeah. And also, too, I mean, we'll have to see. We can speculate about this, of course. We'll have to see as the data starts to come out now, maybe the level of institutional buying, because the data has very clearly shown that in recent weeks and months that whales or large holders have been unloading and retail has been essentially the only buyers. But that's not necessarily that unexpected, I think, because historically, again, maybe this is also because institutional on-ramps are still a fairly new thing. Institutional buying has always lagged behind retail. Like retail has always bought first before institutions. And again, on-ramps, risk profile, I think the speed at which institutions have to operate versus me just clicking buy on my computer. But it will be interesting to see now if we start to see some accumulation, because I mean the chart, I'm not going to pull it up right now, but I mean the chart, just big picture, it doesn't look great. Like in this mini bear market, if you want to call it that, it doesn't look great. But with everything going on in the world, how volatile everything's just so volatile, it could potentially, the bottom could be in.
Wait, so what explains the institutional unloading, though? Because you're talking about retail being first, that makes sense. But
I have a theory. I have a bearish theory. We've talked about it before too, and I don't like to talk about it because it makes me feel uncomfortable personally. But I do have a theory that maybe some people, institutions, whatnot, are a bit more clued in on what's going to happen with the Mt. Gox scenario that's approaching. That's for anyone listening or watching this. This is just a theory too. I'm not saying like sell your coins because Mt. Gox or whatever. But that is one fear I have, and I do wonder if maybe institution, this has been brought to, institutions' attention that, hey, this thing's coming. Maybe you want to decrease your risk exposure because we expect maybe the outcome might be bad.
Because it would flood the market and...
Quick recap. Quick recap. Mt. Gox, probably everyone knows, but it was the largest crypto exchange back in the early days.
Only crypto people know that, by the way.
For all of the non-crypto people watching our podcast, listening to our podcast, Mt. Gox
still here after Tubby Cats. Okay, I'm sorry.
But I think it's like the most massive theft in human history, as far as I know, at its current price. I think almost, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think around $500 billion. So that's a pretty large amount, and obviously not all of the coins were recovered, and they circulated through defunct exchanges now. But there was still a large amount of the coins that were recovered, and there's a process for the those affected by the hack who had their coins on the exchange to get some of their coins back. Which at the time, I mean, Bitcoin was I think it was trading around $1,400 to $1,000. 2013 to 2014 was when the hack was happening.
Okay.
It was kind of an ongoing thing. But yeah, so the fear is that all of these people who, had, a couple $100 worth of Bitcoin back in, 2013 are going to get, $15,000, $16,000 back now, a huge, unexpected, growth and kind of their investment just coming back. And then they're just going to kind of take their profits, dump it.
Yeah,
which would obviously have the downward pressure. So
the optimistic flip side to that I could imagine is that I assume, and I think we've talked about this on previous podcasts as well, that most of these will be sold over the table or over the counter.
Yeah, I
was gonna say under the table,
over
the counter. Yeah. So we'll be sold over the counter, and so if that's the case, and the buyers on the other side of that are keen to buy, then they would want to buy it as cheap as possible, which means it would be essentially in their interest, let's say whales, institutions, whoever, it would be in their interest to be buying those Mt. Gox coins at as cheap as possible if people are just going to unload them. In which case, that could also explain, especially if we continue to see sustained like downward pressure on the price of Bitcoin, like leading more deeper into the year and everything. That could also explain or be one potential um, explanation for why we would be in a bear market.
So you're saying that it's like already priced in, or that it would
Or
essentially
in the
be
process
being
of
priced
being.
in now? Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Again,
Yeah.
this is again just speculation. I'm kind of the listeners at home can just take what I say with a grain of salt. But
Yeah, I mean,
Mt. Gox is going to come one way or another, and I have no idea what the resolution is going to be, but these are some theories floating around my head.
mm-hmm. Yeah. But coming back to the executive order thing, yeah, I'm I'm confused about why it's an executive order. I don't have that's not making sense to me. And is like, was there a speculated relationship between this and the sanctions against Russia from the US?
I think that this executive order had been in the works for a while, though. Like, I think this had been even like before anything.
Okay.
The Biden administration had been, discussing how to, their policy approach on crypto, and this doesn't seem to be like essentially more of a framework for like how they're going to go about creating their policy. But the timing does seem slightly odd to me, just because it feels like it was almost hidden under a lot of the other announcements that are coming out of the administration right now, like the oil import bans on Russian oil, and increasing sanctions and things like that. It's kind of just seemed to be something outside of what most people are probably tuning into the news for, besides if you're in the industry. So it didn't make probably as big of waves as it might have if it were at a different time.
That's definitely strategic.
Yeah.
I also think to a large degree as well, it's also just like a political play of like, look, we're doing something. But doing it as an executive order, I think, is very much a political play, because I don't think it needs to be an executive order. That's where I get a bit conspiratorial, as we kind of already discussed, because it's like, it seems like it was meant to be some big, powerful thing, and it's not really. So maybe it's also just a bit of marketing from the administration of like, we're doing something about crypto. See, like I signed an executive order where we're gonna look really hard at crypto some more, as if they haven't already been looking at it.
Yeah.
Like also positive. Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, like, back to what you mentioned earlier, Adam, of like, things are getting like it seems like to a fever pitch, like more and more. I was asking friends the other day, like, when was the last normal year? Like, when was the last time that things were quote unquote normal? And it seems like every year it's just been like getting more intense. How could anything be more crazier than COVID? How could anything be more crazier, than a Donald Trump presidency, or like this or that? And I think maybe what this policy is not to its benefit, or to speak in a positive way or a negative way about it, but I think it's back to that older way of doing things, of just kind of, it's posturing, it's positioning, it's not dropping a bomb and seeing what happens. So I don't know, maybe it's the old boring bureaucratic way.
I'm not convinced. Well, something.
Yeah,
okay, wait,
it wouldn't have come via an executive order if that was the case.
Well, but legislation is a lot scarier. But the thing is, an executive order is a lot easier to like change. If it's legislation, it's really difficult to that becomes like law. So besides an executive order, I mean, like an executive order is essentially like the federal government, like the executive branch's stance towards something without making like a formalized policy, or I mean, in some ways it can be a formalized policy, but it goes all the way up until that term for the president ends, which then can be, reissued.
To me,
So
as a non-American, an executive order comes across as like crap. We need to act now on this issue, and then the substance of the executive order that we've seen so far really doesn't reflect that.
Yeah.
there's
Wait,
there's
let me
there's
just
hundreds of executive orders that are pushed through, and some of them are immediate and urgent, and some of them aren't, I think.
wait, I just want to read this Bloomberg angle because that's where I'm not getting the dots that they're connecting, and I think that's what they maybe just connected the dots themselves. Actually, maybe the dots aren't related at all, but it could be kind of important to what we're talking about. So the Bloomberg article that went out 2 days ago, March 7th, the headline is Biden to sign crypto order as firms face sanctions pressure. So they put the two dots together, right? And then if you go into the article, it's like the order, it's just a source, people familiar with the matter, talking about, how it will be like the whole government approach. And then it's like the White House's approach to crypto has attracted fresh attention in recent weeks after the US and its allies levied sanctions on Russia, prompting concerns that organizations and individuals could use crypto to evade the restrictions. So it's just like this concept of like there's all eyes on crypto that we've also talked about in separate conversations in the midst of this geopolitical crisis, and that the U.S. government might feel pressure to make some statement about crypto because all eyes on crypto. But the connection is not direct, you know?
Did yeah, in these notes for this executive order, is there anything specifically about sanctioning Russian cryptocurrency addresses? Because I
No.
believe, and I may be mistaken, but I believe there either already is an executive order related to that specific issue, to cryptocurrency addresses from Russia, or a specific one is coming. And I know there was a FinCEN announcement where FinCEN was like, yeah, I do think the cryptocurrency plus Russia thing is like a separate thing that they're like working on or doing, and they didn't put it in with this executive order. But I do think, the media, like, there's almost been a mix, because
Well,
I've been
yeah.
seeing plenty of headlines too about that, about like Biden to sign executive order, like basically cutting off Russian cryptocurrency addresses and forcing everyone to do it and all that stuff. But like, I feel like that's just like in relation to the existing sanctions and the sanctions that are being added on and stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? I feel like that's more of just like a financial thing generally, and not even like a crypto specific thing. Just of like, also in line with these sanctions, you need to watch out for the cryptocurrency usage to avoid them. Um, but not
Yeah,
related to like the Biden's bigger picture of like, I've got a plan for everyone to look at, everyone in the government to team up and
Yeah.
look at crypto.
this is like, but like there's a conflation, right? Like for sure, at least in the media. It's like when you report on something and you're like, this is happening in the environment of this, right? So there's a general US approach to crypto, government approach to crypto in the environment of sanctions. But it's like, no, definitely nothing directly written about Russia or sanctions in the executive order.
But maybe a
So
slight, like,
that's the vision.
the analog though is how some, oil companies and major like like logistics shipping companies have almost went further than the sanctions required when it came to like the import, even before like the import ban was happening. They almost overreacted because they were a bit confused about the letter of the law for the sanctions and wanted to err on the side of like safety. So there were a lot of just analogous is like there were a lot of I think Shell, BP, like they pulled out their investments entirely from Russia, like are selling off their assets, even though they weren't required to. at a loss of hundreds of millions of dollars, but they just said, well, you know what, we're just going to do it because this is where we think it's going anyway. And then when the ban came out on the oil imports, maybe it was
from the U.S. to be
from
clear.
the US, just from the US.
Yesterday.
But maybe this is the signal that is saying to all these institutions and more heavy players who have Bitcoin exposure to say or crypto exposure, I should say, is just don't overreact to this. These sanctions aren't going to be that there's no conflation between these sanctions and the policy that we're going forward with, we, the U.S. government. So could be a clarification thing.
That's why the executive order went out now.
At the timing, yeah, that's my thoughts about why the
timing.
timing.
I think the conflation is good for the U.S. government. It makes it feel. The way the media is reporting is beneficial for the U.S. government because it makes it look like the U.S. government is doing something proactive related to crypto and related to sanctions, which it is not. Not with this executive order, maybe with other executive orders that we don't know about. But so the conflation is convenient, I guess, and maybe that explains the timing. With the oil situation, well, actually, no, we don't need to get into that. It doesn't relate to crypto. I'm just a little confused.
No, it's not
because
that.
Oil was, or energy, right, was the one thing, the commodity that was not being sanctioned because Europe can't live without Russian oil right now. So this is just in terms of the overall global market situation. Yesterday, this news from the U.S. is only about U.S. imports. And is it Europe is kind of poised to try to follow? How can they do that?
Yeah, but they can't. I think they're. The fastest scenario would be 2030 to be independent.
Right. So they would have different alternative energy. But the thing is
and I didn't mean that as a connection. I just meant that as an analogy of how companies were responding before the clarifying ban came out, how they were responding, in a heavier way, which might have been what financial institutions or these kind of larger players were doing with crypto as well.
It's a good analogy or just an important point to bring up right now, I think, because you're right that Western multinational, just giant corporations right now that are restricting or closing their services to Russian citizens and Belarusian citizens, they're doing that mostly not because someone's telling them to, right? It's not actually a law or a formal sanction. So that is interesting how that, how the marketing works around that. They're almost doing it from a moral marketing standpoint.
Virtue signaling in some cases, I would
go
so
heavy
far as
virtue,
to say.
The biggest virtual signaling, the most valuable virtue signaling we've ever seen in the world. I was honestly, side note, McDonald's leaving yesterday.
I was going to say that one too.
Hit me right here. I've been to McDonald's once in Russia. I'm not a McDonald's fan, but McDonald's is
it's a symbol.
They've been in Russia since 1990.
Yeah.
And it's a symbol of Western imperialism. So it's just that one shocked me the most, or I don't even know. I'm not upset that McDonald's is leaving, but I'm just shocked.
But it's almost back in 2014 when there were these sanctions on Russia, and it was almost a PR marketing move then too, because Russia banned the import of European cheeses, and that really, that hit home for a lot of people, and they didn't necessarily know that was, but they didn't realize that was a Russian decision as much, or if they did, they still conflated it with this the sanctions on Russia.
Sanctions.
So I think that it's again just kind of virtue signaling, trying to rally up the I don't know, just
use the moment for something. And that's the thing.
Yeah.
None of us, I don't think, can see the big picture. I mean, I certainly do not see like the overall plan, like what these companies are thinking in terms of cutting out such a huge market. But before you get into speculating why they're doing that, like I'm bringing it back to that parallel of like the executive order on crypto. I think I'm just repeating your parallel, Maxwell, which is like we're not seeing the game fully and clearly. Like we can speculate as to why, but it's definitely not random, right? It's definitely like the timing is good for the US government to do something like that.
Another good thing about it too, which one of the fears going into this that people were floating around like crypto Twitter and even in the media and stuff, I think, was that this could be used as an excuse to crack down on crypto, because they could be like major crack
regulating,
yeah, because they could be like, see, crypto's just being used to avoid sanctions, you know, it's used by terrorist financiers and sanctions avoiders and all this stuff. So like it's good that, you know, I guess that's a positive. This executive order comes out and it's like, well, no, it's not. It's
like, funny how like naming is so important. It's always so important, like in media and geopolitics and just in general, like, right, like, are you a sanctions avoider or are you someone who wants a freedom wanter? I don't know what to call that.
Depends on the Bitcoin address you donate to.
Right.
But I think it is like for the naming of things and the actual like, but what's actually happening. I think like taking the McDonald's example as well is like, I don't think McDonald's is actually selling off their assets in Russia. I think they're suspending their operations there, but they're not selling their Golden Arches, you know, restaurants and everything. So a lot of this, I think, is
different levels from different corporations for sure. And McDonald's,
well, I was gonna say like Microsoft suspending like product sales and like Xbox Live and stuff like in Russia, like okay. I mean, I kind of
be turned back on very easily.
Yeah, but I also kind of fail to see like the point, you know, like that'll show like Putin, you know, like now he can't go play FIFA.
It's to encourage the population to dissent against Putin, isn't it?
Yeah. So the thing with like, so we have like sanctions, and we have then what we're calling virtue signaling, corporate restrictions. And the corporate restrictions, which are not like, in most cases, right, they're not legally required. They're like a choice. That's why we're calling it virtue signaling. And it's a moral or ethical choice. It's also a financial choice. But like that pressure, like if we just look at the corporations, I think it's so if we look at sanctions, rather, those are clearly trying to put pressure on like the economy. If we look at the corporate restrictions, it's like directly affecting private citizens directly. Like everything from Airbnb to McDonald's to Steam to YouTube, people who are YouTube bloggers who now can't get revenue for that, to like, I mean, there's literally a huge list. So what that's doing is like assuming that if you hurt the little person in Russia and also in Belarus, that will encourage, like you said, Rick, that person to like put pressure on their government. It's like making an assumption about a democratic process that is very misinformed. Because like in Russia now, there is a new law about protesting and about like protesting as a form of putting pressure, right, on your government, and about even like protesting on the internet. That's very harsh. So like, you know, I don't think anyone who's not in Russia can really judge Russian citizens for like not pressuring their government enough or something. That whole framework is like very misinformed and coming from, I guess, like a Western model, right? Like if we make their life suck by taking away all of the globalization of the past 20 to 30 years, then people will suffer enough that they'll somehow like transform the decisions of their president, right?
Yeah, I'm in full agreement. And then I also think too that the corporations also are looking at bottom lines as well, and they must also see that like whatever the net gain loss is of doing this, like so if it's I believe Russia's the 15th largest economy in the world. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that's what it is. And they must see like, okay, by cutting off the 15th largest economy in the world, the goodwill we gain from the West maybe like mitigates the losses or something. I'm sure there's more. So I think it's
that's what I'm
two-sided.
saying. We can't like see that whole picture though, right? Like,
yeah.
There's no way that this is not being financially calculated, and they're like not taking care of their margins because they're not just doing it for the sake of it's not legally required, and they're not just doing it for the sake of like goodness, right? Because these are private companies, so they're doing it for profit. But that is crazy that they could have calculated that actually could be profitable. That blows my mind. I don't know. Yeah.
Or at least, if not profitable, at least minimal losses or something that are made up in like positive marketing or something,
Goodwill, like you said. Yeah. Which is, oh man, yeah. You can see I'm very personally invested in this conversation. It's not unprecedented, right? Like, well, I think the scale is unprecedented, and that brings us back to the beginning of our conversation of how this could be the beginning of kind of a new world order financially, geopolitically. There's a lot there, and I'm just like using the words of people who know more about this. I lost my train of thought.
Yeah, it does bring it back full circle because I think what we're getting at here too is like the average person, using the average Russian as an example, but it can happen pretty much anywhere. The average person can be punished, can lose money, can lose access to Xbox or McDonald's or whatever. The average person can be like reprimanded for things that they did not do, that ultimately have nothing to do with them. So that is sort of one of the core tenets of why Bitcoin, isn't it? Of just nobody can, Bitcoin's censorship resistant.
Yeah, and I had lost track of my train of thought, but it came back to me, which is that the like precedented part of this is like, let's take Iran, for example. This has happened on a scale with other countries. Massive sanctions from the US and other Western governments against a particular country, and like big financial institutions or networks like Swift, Visa, MasterCard have been turned off for Iran as well. But with Russia, it's like that, and there's other sanctions against Iran, obviously. But with Russia, it's like the reason it feels like so far in the past week and a half, or it's now 2 weeks, that the scale's bigger is because it's like, that's just one part. Like no Visa, no MasterCard, no Swift is just, it's big, but it's just one part of like this huge wave of sanctions that, like really kind of show the powerlessness of the individual citizen.
Yeah, there's a lot to go into on sanctions and their effectiveness, and there's a lot of research going on. Also, I mean, just historically of whether the actual the threat of the sanction has to pretty much be enough, and like you have to be able to you have to follow through. But at that point, it's like North Korea. So if McDonald's all of a sudden leaves North Korea, it's hard to imagine that the people are going to stand up there necessarily.
Yeah, so I got to run off to parent-teacher conferences at my kid's school. So I'm going to say goodbye for Olivia, Rick, Maxwell, and myself. Thanks for tuning in. As always, like, subscribe, ring the notification bell on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, comment if you want to ask us anything or if you want us to talk about something in a future episode. Also, please like and share and everything if you're listening to this on your preferred podcast distribution platform. Yeah, so until next time.